Most labor disputes are about money, about hours, about the conditions under which work is performed, about the distribution of value between the workers who create it and the organizations that profit from it. These are rational arguments, grievances with concrete content, demands that can be articulated clearly and negotiated over. But labor disputes, like most human conflicts, rarely remain purely rational. They accumulate symbolic dimensions, become attached to specific objects and events that take on meaning that goes far beyond the original dispute, become about pride and principle and the question of who gets to decide how things are done. A locomotive, which begins as simply a piece of equipment, can become caught up in this symbolic accumulation without ever being the actual subject of the dispute. The locomotive whose story this is became, in 1938, the unwitting symbol of a labor conflict that had nothing to do with the locomotive itself, that could have used any locomotive as effectively, but that seized on this specific machine because circumstances made it available and visible at the moment when the dispute needed a symbol to focus on. The result was that the locomotive became politically important, became the center of attention in a dispute it had no role in creating, and remained marked by that symbolic importance for the rest of its service life. The context was the Great Western Railway in the late 1930s, in the years when labor organizing in Britain was intensifying, when the railway unions were making increasing demands for recognition and negotiation rights, and when railway management was resisting with a kind of institutional stubbornness that characterizes organizations that have never had to negotiate with their workers. The specific dispute that emerged in 1938 concerned the refusal of the GWR's management to recognize the legitimacy of a particular union's claim to represent the railway's workers, and the union's response to organize job actions that would force the company to take them seriously. The job action that was organized was a work to rule campaign, the specific tactic of workers following every rule and regulation in their job descriptions with absolute precision, a tactic that disrupts operations without constituting a formal strike, because the workers are not refusing to work, but simply refusing to do the informal shortcutting and rule bending that makes industrial operations actually function. When everyone does their job exactly as written, when no one takes the informal shortcuts that experience and practical knowledge have shown are safe and efficient, when the rules are followed to the letter rather than in the spirit, the result is operational disruption that is technically not a strike, but that is functionally equivalent to one in terms of its impact on the organization. The GWR's response to the Work to Rule campaign was to attempt to demonstrate that the union was being unreasonable, that the workers' insistence on following the rules to the letter was causing the kind of disruption that proved the workers were the problem rather than the company being the problem. Management attempted to operate trains normally despite the work to rule action, and it attempted to do this in a way that would demonstrate to the public and to the government that the union was being deliberately obstructionist. The specific incident that made the locomotive politically significant occurred during one of these attempted operations. A train was being prepared for service, and the routine maintenance checks that preceded departure were being conducted by workers who were following the work-to-rule protocol with absolute precision. The locomotive selected for the service was a reasonably new Castle-class engine, a prestigious express locomotive of the kind that the GWR used for its best services. The maintenance crew, following the rules to the letter, conducted an inspection that identified a condition in the locomotive that, while not technically a safety issue, was not ideal, and that the maintenance documentation suggested should be addressed before the locomotive was taken out on an important service. Under normal circumstances, the fitter who conducted the inspection would have made a judgment call, would have assessed the condition and made a professional decision about whether it was serious enough to keep the locomotive out of service, or whether it could be addressed through more careful operation. The fitter, operating under the work-to-rule protocol, made no judgment call. The documentation said the condition should be addressed. The fitter reported it, and the locomotive was removed from the service. Management's response was to claim that the union was using technical nitpicking as a way to sabotage operations, that workers were deliberately finding problems that didn't really exist as a way to make the company look bad. The union's response was that the workers were doing exactly what the company's own documentation said they should do, that if following the company's rules meant that locomotives had to be taken out of service, that was a problem with the company's rules or the company's standards, not a problem with the workers. The specific locomotive, the Castle that had been removed from service on the basis of the fitter's strict interpretation of the maintenance requirements, became the symbol of this disagreement. The locomotive was photographed, publicized. The subject of disputes about whether the condition of the fitter had identified was genuinely significant, or whether it was the kind of minor thing that any reasonably experienced crew could have worked around. The locomotive became the physical embodiment of the dispute between management and union, between the company's insistence that the union was being deliberately obstructionist and the union's insistence that it was simply requiring the company to live up to its own standards. The resolution of the specific incident was, like the resolution of most such disputes, determined not by the merits of the case, but by the balance of power and the willingness of each side to accept a settlement. The union gained some recognition, not full recognition, but enough of a concession that the work-to-rule campaign could be stood down. The company gained the end of the disruption and the ability to resume normal operations. The locomotive, which had been the symbol of the dispute, returned to normal service, was repaired or not repaired, depending on subsequent assessment of the condition the fitter had identified, and continued working What the locomotive carried with it from that point forward was the association with the labor dispute. The locomotive that had been selected randomly for that particular maintenance check, that had happened to have a fitter available who was precise and rule-bound enough to flag the condition, that had happened to be present at the moment when the dispute needed a symbol, became politically marked by its involuntary participation in the labor conflict. The workers who subsequently operated the locomotive were aware of its history. Management was aware of its history. In the informal culture of the railway, the locomotive became the machine that the union had used to make its point. Even though the locomotive had had nothing to do with the actual dispute and had been purely incidental to the symbol making that the labor conflict required. The locomotive continued in service for years after the labor dispute had been resolved and largely forgotten by the organization at large. It performed its assigned duties, was maintained and operated like any other locomotive of its class, accumulated service mileage through the war years and into the post-war period. But it never shed the association with the labor conflict it had become caught up in, and that association shaped how it was understood within the organization for the rest of its service life. The locomotive was eventually scrapped like the overwhelming majority of steam locomotives, with no particular attention or preservation campaign. What survived was the memory of the labor dispute and the specific role the locomotive had played in it. A role the locomotive had had no agency in determining, but that had shaped the meaning attached to it nonetheless. The story of this locomotive teaches something about how symbols work in labor conflicts, about how inanimate objects can become caught up in human disputes and become marked by those disputes in ways that are invisible to observers who are not part of the community that made the symbol meaningful. The locomotive was not inherently political. It became political through the circumstances of its deployment in a conflict it had nothing to do with. And once it had been made political, it carried that political meaning with it, whether anyone noticed it or whether the meaning persisted only in the informal culture of the people who worked with the machine. This is how objects become significant in labor history, not through any dramatic role they play, but through the accident of being present when a symbol is needed and when the symbol-making machinery of human conflict seizes on the available material and transforms it into meaning. The locomotive was just a machine, but it became, briefly and involuntarily, the phase of a labor dispute, and it never entirely shed that role, even after the dispute itself had been resolved and largely forgotten.